Hi everybody and welcome back. I am a hacker and it's really nice to have you on board. In this video, we'll discuss Lambda expressions. Lambda expressions are a way to quickly create what are known as anonymous functions. Anonymous functions are basically just one-time use functions that you don't even really name. You just use them once and never really reference them again. To understand why this would be useful and in what context you would use this, we need to understand first the map function that is built into Python as well as the filter function that is also built into Python. So let's open up Jupyter Notebook and talk about map and talk about filter and understand them, and then we'll continue towards Lambda expression. So I'm here at Jupyter Notebook. Let's understand map function. Well, just to give an introduction, the map function allows you to map a function to an iterable object. That is to say, you can quickly call the same function to every item in an iterable, such as a list. So let's practically do that and understand that. So suppose I have a list by the name of my nums, which is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and something silly like that. So what I need is the square of all the numbers in the list. So one way could be I run a for loop and iterate through all of the list and find a square and then display it on the screen or use it in some other way or create a list from it. But that's a lengthy way and I'm really lazy to do that. So instead, there is a really efficient way to do that. So first I will create a function by the name of square. And the square will receive a number, and all it will do would be to return the square of the number that's been passed to the function. So now that the function is created, we can use map function on it. I will write map and then press shift and tab, and it will show me all of the details about the map function. So what map function does is it receives a function and an iterable object. In our case, the function is square and the iterable object is my num. What it returns is the list on which it performs the function. So let's practically do that. I will add the brackets, and then inside the brackets I will give it the square function, and then the second one would be the iterable, which is my nums. If I press shift and enter, you would see that it would return a map object which has this map and then add and a memory location. So it's not really helpful. If I either loop it through or just cast it to a list, you would see that it would return a list having all the numbers squared of the original list that we provided. So what it does is it receives a function and an iterable object, and it just binds this function with all of the single object, which was 1, 2, 3. It binded the functions, the square function, with all the objects, and it just returned a list. So I can do the same thing. So I can achieve the same thing with the loop as well for num in this map object, print num. And if I press shift and enter, so if I run this, it will give me an error, and obviously it will, because we don't need the parentheses right over here, but instead we need them right over here. And if I press shift and enter, you would see that it will return the numbers as it was shown in the list. So from this we can see that either we can cast the map, the return result of a map to a list, or we can iterate through using a for loop. One thing to notice right over here is that you don't need to provide this square function as a function with the original, like you don't need to call this square function right over here, because this map function would call it later on. If you provide it the call function and just press shift and enter, you would see that you will get an error right over here. So instead you should provide square as just like you write some variable or something, or a list or something like that. Just the name without the parentheses, because the map function will call it later on. If you do that, you would see that the result would be okay. So far we have studied how you can bind this map function with an iterable object. Now to add furthermore to this map function, it's not just that you can just perform this simple operation of square with this map, or you can just bind this list to just this square operation, which is pretty simple. You can just do a lot more complex things than a square. So let's make things a little bit more complicated and create a function by the name of splicer, which would receive my string, or which would receive any string, and all it would do, it would just check if the length of my string is even. If the length of my string is even, it will return even, and if it's not, it will just return the first element of my string. And if I press shift and enter, we have an error, and that is we need to get this to right over here and then press shift and enter, and everything is okay. Now that the function is okay and we have ran it and it's working fine with no errors, we can just create a list of names. So that would be my names list, and it will be equal to Andy, Dandy, Chicken, Bandy. Sorry about these silly things. I just want to make it a little bit funnier than normal, because you can see that it's already boring. Anyway, we have created the list of these names, and now I can copy this statement and paste it right over here, and instead of this my nums, I can provide my name list, and instead of square I can provide this splicer. So if I press shift and enter, you would see that the first two names are even, so it returned even, and the third and fourth is not even, so that's why it just returned the first word of the first character of the name or the string. So you can do, my point right over here was to show you that you can do a lot more complex things with this map function instead of just performing this square function. So that was the takeaway. Anyway, let's move on further and let's understand the filter function. So the filter function returns an iterable yield those items of iterable for which the function item is true. So what that means is, suppose we forward a list to something and we check, in that function we check a condition. So if the condition is true, it will add those things to the list. If that's not true, it will just disregard that, or it will just ignore that. So let's practically check that and understand that in practical manner. So I'll create a function by the name of check if even, and it will receive a number, obviously, because a number can either be even or odd. It's another thing that we have checked right over here, the length of these names, but it's obvious that it will receive a number. Anyway, once it receives a number, it will return if num2 is equal to 0. What that means is, if the number is even or perfectly divisible by 2, just return it. Otherwise, return true, otherwise return false. So I will create a long list. First I will run this function, and then I will create a long list which would be equal to nums, and that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and something like that. Anyway, we have this list ready to go. Now we need to perform this filter function. So I can, in order to perform a filter function, I can just write filter, and to this filter I can just provide this check if even function, and I can provide the iterable object, which is num. And if I press shift and enter, you would see that it will return the same thing that was returned by map. So either I can cast it to list or iterate it through for loop or any other loop like while etc. And if I cast it to list, you would see that it will just store those values in the result list which are even. And you can do it for odd as well. If I just make it 3, press shift and enter, and then come over here, you would see that it will now store just the odd numbers. So that was filter function. Filter function is used to store some values on the true of a function. So it receives a function and an iterable object. Once more, the filter function returns an iterable yielding those items of iterable for which the function item is true. Meaning you need to filter by a function that returns either true or false, then passing that into filter along with your iterable, and you will get back only the result that would return true when passed to the function. In our case, we perform that by checking if the object is even, and it just returned the even, and another thing with the odd, in that it just returned the odd object. Now that we do understand two things, one is the filter function and the other one is map function, now let's understand the lambda expression. So first understand how we can convert the square function to a lambda function. Do note that square is a normal function and we need to convert it to lambda. So in order to convert, so we need to go step by step. In order to convert this square function, let's just run it, that everything works fine. Let's just call it with 2 as well as with 3 and find out if it works perfectly fine. Yes, indeed it does. If we pass a number, it returns the square of it. Anyway, in order to convert this lambda function, in order to convert this normal square function to lambda, the first thing we need to do is remove this diff and square and write lambda instead. Then the next thing we would do, we would remove this return and write everything in one line. So this is basically lambda function. Now if I run it, you would see that it will run okay. In this case, you need to store it in a variable. So let's call it square and make it equal to this lambda function. If I run it and then run this function, you would see that it will work okay. Let's check it with another number, suppose 5, and you would see that it will return 25. So up till now, everything is okay. As explained earlier, lambda functions are anonymous function that we don't really name. In this case, I named it or I stored it in a variable because I wanted to call it for something, but in your case, but in normal cases, you don't need to name it. You just use it. And you would say where you would use this anonymous function. So you would use it in the case of map function where we call this square. So instead of calling this square, I will just copy this and just write it right over here. So if I press shift and enter, you would see that it will return the same thing which it would return with the square function. So here you can see we needed a function, an anonymous function that was one time, that we needed to call one time, and we really didn't want it to reference it again in our code. So there we use this lambda function. And what is a lambda function? Well, lambda function is a function that is an anonymous function which to which we don't give a name and which we don't reference later on. You can use it in the case of this check is even as well. So once more, if you're willing to convert a normal function to lambda function, first you need to remove this return statement, and then instead of the name and the def keyword, you just write lambda, and you just remove that you just remove the parentheses, and this is the parameter, and this is what you do inside the function. If I cut this and write filter, and if I press shift tab, you would see that it will receive a function that would be either lambda function or normal function, whatever you want to give it. And then the next thing it would receive would be the iterable object. So in our case, it is this num. And if I press shift and enter, and we need to cast it to list, if I cast it to list, you would see that it will just receive the odd numbers. And if I make it to even, you would see that it would just store the even numbers. So by now, I hope you did understood what lambda expressions are and how you can use them. Do note that in the start, it would be a little bit difficult to use these lambda expressions because these are a little bit difficult to understand, especially when you return after some time and review your code again. Like you have left the code, suppose for a week or two, and you came back and you just looked at it. So it would be a little bit difficult to analyze the code and understand what's happening. So you should always think about the code readability first, and if you are a beginner, especially, you should care about your code readability, because if you overcomplicate things, you would get fed up and leave the coding. Just a little note that if at some point you understand that you cannot convert a normal function to a lambda function, the best practice would be to use a normal function. So you will find yourself using these lambda expression more and more in places where certain non-built libraries, for example, like pandas library for data analysis, works very well with lambda expression. So this is pretty much it for this video. I hope you did understood what I wanted to show you. Let's recap once more. The main objective of this video was to understand the map function, the filter function, and lambda expression, and where you use it and stuff like that. So this is pretty much it for this video. Hopefully you did understood everything what I wanted to show you. Till next time, enjoy hacking, stay cheeky breaky, and peace out.